Hello and welcome back to CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Hannah Huesman, Mental Performance Coordinator at Texas Rangers. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Colin, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited that we managed to get this in the diary, navigate the different time zones with your travel schedule, with work and everything else that's going on at the moment. Really, really pleased to get into this one. But I understand that as an undergraduate, you were into exercise science, but I've introduced you there as a mental performance coordinator. So when did your interest in this space start to begin?
Yeah, great question. So yes, my undergrad was in exercise science, and I actually thought I was going to be a strength and conditioning coach. So I kind of always knew, I played sports my whole life, and I always knew I wanted to stay in sport for my profession. I just really didn't know to what capacity I was going to do that in. And so I studied exercise science, just kind of learning about the body and how the body works and how it moves and everything. And then my senior year, so my last year of undergrad, I took an intro to sports psychology class and kind of was blown away by it from the very beginning. Was like, what is this? How come, on our team, we're not using this? Like, we work so hard physically, but we're not really doing anything mentally. And I know I personally could have definitely used it back then. And so I kind of just jumped in head first and was like, what is this? I want to learn about this. And then come to find out there were master's programs and doctoral programs for sports psychology. And I was like, I'm in. So kind of bought in there, and then went to the University of Tennessee to get my master's in sports psychology and motor behavior, and haven't looked back ever since. So yeah, that's kind of how I got introduced to it. Just stumbled upon it in a random elective class.
Yeah, it's funny how these things happen, because sometimes you'll hear stories like maybe somebody particularly struggled in an area themselves and they came across something and it lit their fire. But in the same way, if you stumble across a particular academic subject and it starts things firing off in your head and you're thinking, this is where I want to spend more of my time, and you're already somebody that's playing at a high level yourself in terms of a college athlete, that's quite interesting. When you were first getting exposed to that mental side of things, were you still playing at a relatively high level, or did things start to go in the back burner quickly?
No, yeah, that was my senior year. So I was still playing, and it was, it was my last season. So it was kind of cool to learn things in the classroom and kind of try them out on my teammates and try them out with my coaches and hey, what do we think about this? And, not knowing what in the world I was doing, but immediately wanting to try to apply it. But unfortunately I only had a year. But then what's funny is my husband, my now husband, was playing football and was the quarterback there. And so as soon as I went to grad school, every night I'd come back and be like, hey, I got to teach you this. I got to talk to you about this. Listen to this. And he finally was like, all right, enough mental performance, because I was so in love with it and wanted to talk about it all the time. So I kind of started practicing out on him first, and he'll tell everybody. He was my first official client. So, but yeah, it was cool. I tried to apply it a little bit, but it was a little too late for my playing career. And I wish I would have had it sooner. And I talk about that all the time. So.
What do you think are some of the things that you wish you knew when you were working your way up as a college athlete from a mental perspective?
Yeah, I think a couple things. The first one would be all about confidence. I think it's something we all struggle with, especially when we're performing at elite levels and we're doing really hard things that not a lot of people are doing. Right. And so it's not supposed to be easy. It's not, they say if it's easy, everybody would do it, but it's knowing that you're going to fail, but that you can still get better from failure, and that confidence that you're kind of always searching for isn't going to come from anybody else. It has to actually come from you. To believe in it, to believe in yourself, you have to look internally and figure out why you should believe in yourself, instead of I was constantly looking for praise and attention from other people, whether it was my family, my coaches, my significant others, my teammates, tell me how good I'm doing. Tell me I'm good. And the reality of it is you don't get that. And I wish I would have known that everything I was searching for, I could have found within myself. But I didn't know that back then. So that's probably the biggest thing I learned is how to create your own confidence. And the second thing is probably just let going of the things you can't control. And really, if you're going to put your effort into something, put your effort into the things you actually have control over. When we put so much effort into the things we can't do anything about, but we don't even know that we're doing that, it just takes up so much time and gets us nowhere. We become stagnant, or we go crazy because we're I'm doing all this stuff and nothing's changing. It's because you can't change that. Right. It's because no matter how hard you work or how much you pray or fingers crossed or try to luck your way out of it. Like you can't. And so it's like, what can you actually control about that situation? And those are the things you put your time and energy into. And once you do that, it's like, you know, you are going to see the rewards of the things you're trying to get because it's the things you have control over. So that was a big shift in mentality too, for me.
I love both of those. And I think from a confidence perspective, one of the things you didn't mention in terms of seeking confidence and support is a lot of people now seek it from social media, particularly nowadays. And you see a lot of athletes sometimes coming off socials, or they have like a team managing their socials for them. But as a college athlete who there's maybe like a small dedicated group of people that follow that page's social media or the university's social media, you probably get exposed to a lot of either validation or degradation of your performance or how you've done or how the team's going. And it's maybe even more powerful now that your own like assurance and confidence in yourself comes from within, rather than maybe people loving your highlights reel on your Instagram.
Totally. And I still like, I think that's the thing about mental performance is it's just like physical performance, right? We were talking before we got on here, and it's like, you know, physical skills, you're constantly continuously trying to get better at them, right? You don't just work out one time and then you're strong and you're good to go, right? Or you don't just sprint one time and you're fast and you're good to go, right? You do it over and over and over and over again. Sometimes for some reason with mental performance, we think like we do it one time and we're good. So we have this awesome conversation about inner confidence and we think we're good. No, I have to practice that on almost a weekly basis, like of even because I still get validation through social media. I still get validation from everybody around me. And sometimes I let that in too much. And then the next day I find out, shoot, I'm still looking for it. And it's like, no, it has to come from me. So like actually setting up, you know, some kind of task or a reminder for myself to build that true confidence, right? That healthy confidence, not that almost a junk confidence that other people are feeding that like you think is what's going to make you strong and make you better. But in reality, it might have a reverse effect. And I think so often we just think mental performance is a one-stop shop instead of just, hey, we have to continuously work on this, just like we have to continuously work on our physical game.
That's interesting. You mentioned like a task or some sort of reminder. Do you have like a calendar reminder in your diary or something like that to how do you do it?
I have a little sticky note written on my mirror in my bathroom, and it's like, say something that you're confident about yourself today, because I think that's a great time. I don't know about guys, but I know girls, like as soon as we get in front of a mirror, right, we're criticizing what we're seeing. We're not looking for the good, we're looking for the bad. And like, what do we need to fix? How do I need to fix this before I leave the house? And we don't sometimes recognize like, wow, I really like this feature about myself, or I really like this, or I'm really proud of this. And so it's a reminder for me to like remind myself to be confident about something that I've controlled. So maybe if I have a really good workout and I've worked out for the last month, and I start to notice like I'm getting a little more muscular in my shoulders or my face, or something's happening, like it's like, heck yes, I did that. I control, instead of just like, wow, on a whim, I feel good today. It's like, no. Why do you feel good today? Like, why do you feel well rested? Why do you feel hydrated? You know, and it's really empowering the things that you have control over. But yeah, absolutely. I have to remind myself every day, because I mean, geez, you have your phone, you have so many distractions. It's really easy to get caught up in all that. And you really do need those daily reminders.
I love that you've linked the two C's there, the confidence and the controllables, because straight away you've said there about I'm confident in something that I've done and it's an area that I've got control over. And the kind of third C that springs to mind for me when I talk about confidence is actually competence. So actually spending time getting good at something has a huge impact, and being reassured that, yes, I am indeed competent in this area. Of course, you're likely to have more confidence. So you're probably more confident now delivering your mental sweat Mondays, which we'll get on to, than you were when you started recording them back in the day. You're probably more confident when it comes to delivering like a seminar or a talk to your team at the Rangers than when you were an intern.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes with it, right? That it comes with practice. It comes with doing it over and over and over again. And it comes with the fear or not having the fear of failing or messing up, right? Because guess what? We're all going to mess up. You are going to mess up. If it's your first time doing something, you're going to mess up. The first time you recorded a podcast, it probably didn't go smoothly, right? And that's also like, I post bloopers every year too, because people need to know how real it is. Like, it's one of my most liked videos of the year. And I'm like, you guys just like to see me fail, but they do, because people are people. We're humans. Like, we are all failing. Like, and we just view these social media pages and everything going on that like everything's perfect in your world and you never fail. And the reality of it is, no, the reason people get good at something is because they failed so many times. They have failed more than you. If somebody is better at something than you, they've probably failed more than you have. Like, think about that. And once I got over that, and don't get me wrong, I still battle that, right? Sometimes it's not easy to go when I go in front of a big group of people and it's a keynote presentation or something, like I am shaking, but I know how to control it now, right? And I know my perception and my perspective of that shaking is my body's telling me I'm ready instead of, oh shoot, we're done, like, right. And it's all in your perception of what's happening. So yeah, I absolutely, no doubt.
That's amazing the way that you've linked again into self-talk, because before that presentation you could quite easily be like, I'm shaking with nerves, I'm a nervous wreck, I'm going to talk too quickly, I'm going to stutter, I'm going to fluff my lines, I'm going to forget what I'm going to talk about, mind blank, whatever else are like common fears of public speaking.
Totally.
Straight away, you've just reframed it as, my body's giving me nervous energy so I can deliver this talk with like energy and fluency and passion or whatever other names you can throw around.
Absolutely. But that one little adjustment can make or break you, right? Like, do you let those nerves take over or do you take over them, right? And you can't necessarily control the feeling that you're feeling, but you can control your your response to that feeling, which is exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah, fantastic, Hannah. I really want to dive into your career today. How did you start your career in mental performance after you finished your master's? Because mental performance coordinator is not a title that many people walk around with as their job.
Yeah. So I started where most people start, just doing internships. I did 2 internships during my grad school. So while I was still in school, and then as soon as I graduated in December, I got an internship lined up with the Pittsburgh Pirates Major League Baseball team for February. So I graduated with my master's and went straight into an internship, which I think is interesting, right? Because I think, you know, the old school way of thinking is, oh, I have my master's, now I'm going to go make $100,000 right now, you know, and I went to like a barely paid internship, you know, but that was the route that I was told to take. And it was an incredible opportunity. And it was one of the first mental performance internships in baseball. There weren't very many at the time. So I went and did that for a year and then realized I had to go make some money. I think I was turning 25 that year after grad school and 1 year of an internship post school. And I was like, okay, I got to start making some kind of money. And so I actually moved to New York City, and worked for a private practice where I was doing the same thing. I was doing mental performance coaching. And then after a little over a year with that, I was like, I really wanted to get back into baseball. I just loved the high pressure, high stress, high reward domain of work. And I think mental performance is so awesome in that area. And so I started interviewing and jumped back into baseball. And I spent the last 4 years with the Philadelphia Phillies baseball organization. And then just this past December, about a month ago, I transferred to the Rangers. And so I just started with them as the mental performance coordinator for them. And I'm just really excited about where we're going from there. So it was a lot of experiences. It took me all over, right? I was in Florida, New York, Florida, and then home. And so it's kind of crazy where they take you. But my biggest piece of advice for people who are trying to get into the field is like, go wherever the opportunity takes you. If you're willing to do it, go do it 100%. And then have confidence in yourself and be enthusiastic. Like, those 2 things will take you a long way. Like, if you love what you do and you're confident about what you do, not in an arrogant way, but in a like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. Like, listen to this kind of way. And you can hold your own with the people around you. Like, that's the kind of people want to hire. And like, I can't tell you how many times I hear like, we just love your energy. And I'm like, how do you not have energy about what you do? Like, you have to but that's always been a rule for me, right? Maybe that isn't a rule for everybody, is like, I want to love what I'm doing and enjoy what I'm doing. That makes podcasts, that makes presentations, that makes the speaking events so fun for me, instead of like, okay, great, another day on the job, another thing I have to do, right? It's like, no, I love this. And like, don't get me wrong, it's still work. Like, I work my tail off. I know people say, if you love your job, you never work. Now, I love my job and I work my tail off. So I think that's an important thing. Like, you still work really hard, but you're loving what you do. And it's almost all rewarding, instead of just like getting a little reward every now and then. It's like gosh, I just love this work. So
Your passion
yeah,
comes
that's how I
through.
got to where I'm at.
Your passion really comes through, Hannah, and I appreciate that. What does a
Yeah.
day, or maybe more broadly a week, look like? Because obviously maybe you're not having games every day, but you're maybe building up to a game in a week. What does that look like within your role?
Yeah. So it looks different every week. Every day usually looks different, but in the grand scheme of things, it's probably I usually wake up, work out in the morning, head in, have meetings and scheduled one-on-one sessions with players or staff and help support them. And then I'm a part of practice, right? So you're around while they're practicing and on the field and doing everything they're doing. We're around trying to be really integrated into what they're doing and not just making it something separate that they do at the end of the day. We're trying to, really integrate the mental with the physical side of things. And then watch a game if there's a game, and be in the dugout when they're there. And then post game, be around and ready for more one-on-ones and individual stuff. And maybe there's a group development or a workshop that day too. It just kind of depends on what the schedule is. That's just hitting on one mental performance topic with a group of people, whether it's staff or players. And then, yeah, hang out, because there's always some stragglers that come up and want to talk at the end of the day and like, hey, this is what happened. Can we work through this a little bit, or how do I handle this? And then have my phone, and I'm kind of on call all night. And if anybody like gets home and starts beating themselves up and they just want to talk about something, or their mind is hard to shut down, which happens to a lot of us, and we just think and think and think, they can reach out too. And so that's pretty much the end of the day, and then start all over and do it again. So
how do we differentiate between mental performance and mental health? Because mental health is a massive topic at the moment. Mental performance is probably slightly different. How would you differentiate?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. I think it's incredibly important that people do know the difference, because both are incredibly important and both are incredibly valuable, but they are really, really different. And I like to view it as like a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have mental performance, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have mental health. So mental health is, on the far end of mental health, you have suicide, right? Suicidality, you have depression, serious anxiety, eating disorders, all of that, right? So that's your mental health side of things. And that's where therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists come into play. Obviously, this is incredibly important, right? If your mental health isn't where it needs to be, it doesn't matter what your mental performance is, right? So I think mental health comes first. But mental health is more of a reactive situation, right? It's like, as soon as you have anxiety, you go see somebody. When you're depressed, you go see somebody. When you are having eating disorder, you go see somebody. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum is mental performance, where you're not necessarily looking for an issue to fix like you would be for mental health. You're almost, it's just like strength and conditioning, right? It's just like weight room. You're taking strong athletes who are totally fine, and you're trying to make them better. You're trying to make something stronger, right? You don't have to be broke to go talk to a mental performance coach. In fact, most of the people mental performance coaches work with are just high-level performers who want to get even better, which I think is the coolest part. So it's not reactive, it's proactive, right? So just like you don't wait till you almost hit a home run to then go lift so you can get stronger. So next time you hit a home run, right? You're lifting heavy weights so that you can hit a home run. Well, we want to lift heavy mental weights, right? What are you going to do when shit hits the fan? What are you going to do when you're really stressed? What are you going to do when you get anxious before a presentation? Do you know what you're going to do? Because if in mental performance, if you wait for that moment to happen and you don't have the tools, it's going to be really, really hard to get through that. But if you can be proactive about it and work on anything from confidence, composure, resiliency, motivation, enjoyment, focus training, any of that is on your mental performance side of things. So those are things you're just strengthening, you're making better, and you're working on those, and you're putting yourself in situations so that when you do have a hard situation, you already have the tools in your toolbox to equip you for that situation, whatever it is.
Yeah, amazing, Hannah. Such a clear definition. And I think you can clearly see where your remit starts and ends, and it's like bulletproofing somebody as much as possible so that maybe perhaps they don't end up towards that other end of the spectrum where things become a challenge. Because I certainly know that when I look after these other boxes in my mental performance, I'm less likely to have challenges around my mental health, albeit of course we appreciate there's lots of different circumstances and different situations for people, but tick those other boxes first, work on these areas. One of the phrases that I quite like is fix the roof when the sun shines. So when you're in a good position, making sure that you repair everything before it comes to the situation where you maybe need to make some emergency repairs or be reactive, as you just described.
I love that. I love that. Fix the roof when the sun shines. No, 100%, right? Because by the time when the roof isn't fixed and it starts raining, you're done. Like all you can do is put the bucket underneath it, right? And catch the water, right? And so I couldn't agree more than that. And I think you're right to a certain extent, right? It's like, say you get nervous before something and you don't have the tools, and then you get nervous again and again and again and again. All of a sudden that just like, butterflies in your stomach could turn into clinical anxiety. And now we're not just getting nervous before a presentation. Now we don't even want to get out of the bed in the morning because we're so anxious about what the day has to hold. And like, that's clinical, right? Now we need to like call in the big people and figure out what's going on. And so I, like you said, respecting everything people go through, but if you can know how to manage stress and know how to handle nerves and anxiousness and all that before it gets really, really bad, obviously we would love to do that. And before it gets really bad, and then we have to go replace the whole roof, so to speak. So no, I love that. Fix the roof when sun shines. I love that.
I hope to see it in a mental sweat one day.
You might. I'll give you credit though.
How do you get athlete buy-in if somebody's a little bit reluctant to speak to you? Because I'm thinking about the environments you might operate within, where you've got obviously people who are very keen to explore peak performance in so many ways, the type of people that listen to a podcast like this where they want to learn and develop. But then you might also have people who they may be very naturally talented, and the thought of, I don't want to work on the mental side of my game. Like, what does Hannah know? How do you get them under your wing and help them?
Yeah. So great question. And, I learned a great lesson from Ken Ravizza. He used to say, he's like the godfather of sports psychology and baseball. But he used to say, when you're talking to a group of people, a third of the people are going to be really bought in. A third of the people are going to be in this middle ground, like could care less, but they're there. They're going to be paying attention. And the last third could give two shits about what you're talking about. And I've always been like, no, like I want everybody to care about what I'm talking about. Like I love what I'm talking about, so you should like what I'm talking about. But the reality of it is like, there's people talking about other stuff that I don't really care about, that they're really passionate about. And so it's really, I like to call it like you're dancing with them instead of wrestling with them, right? Because the analogy I use, if you have two rooms side by side and you have, the little skinny mirror that you can look through, or window that you can look through to see what's going on. If you walk past a room and in one room you have a couple dancing and in another room you have a couple wrestling, but they're wearing the exact same clothes, if you just walk by, you may not know if they're dancing or if they're wrestling. But the reality of it is, because it looks so similar, but wrestling is like, hey, I have something I want to show you. I'm going to pin you down and you got to listen to what I'm going to say, whether you want to or not. Whereas dancing is like, hey, okay, hey, I've got this. And they take a step back. So you take a step back, right? And you're like, okay, they're not super interested. I'm either going to take a step back and get to know them on a personal level. And then what I say is build the relationship so well that when the light bulb clicks, that they actually realize I need mental performance, the first person they're going to come talk to you is you. Instead of like, okay, this person doesn't want any mental performance, I'm writing him off or her off, and I'm not going to talk to him ever again. No, I'm going to talk to you just like I talk to everybody else, but maybe not dive right into mental performance where I'm kind of forcing it on you. I'm just going to be like, how's your dog? Like, how's your mom? How's home? How's whatever else, anything we talk about. And next thing you know, we build this relationship, and it happens all the time. You build this relationship with them, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, this is happening. What do you got? And I'm like, oh shoot, they're asking a mental performance question. Like, here we go. Let's go. Like, this isn't, and those are the things that like make my day. Or so you have that. And then you have, if there's one person out of the group that doesn't buy in and everybody else is buying in, eventually they're going to start asking questions. They're going to be like, wait, if everybody is spending time doing this and making this important, I should probably be making this important too. So I try really hard not to force it, because I have never seen it go well when somebody does try to force it. So I don't force it. I try to meet them where they're at. I still love them as human beings, which is a huge part of my role too. Getting you to be your elite on a mental performance side. I got to know who you are as a human being. Like, what makes you tick? What makes you excited? How do you react to stress? All of those things. And so it's just, I get to stay in that stage of getting to know the human a little bit longer on the people who don't buy in immediately.
Yeah, if you're going to borrow my roof analogy, I'm definitely going to borrow the wrestling and the dancing analogy.
I love it. Go for it.
That's absolutely a brilliant way to describe it, because if you were to wrestle, then it creates straight away, it's a physical aggression, whereas dance is a much more collaborative approach,
Totally.
much more collaborative activity. So no, that makes so much sense, Hannah. And I think asking those questions that are away from mental performance and building rapport builds trust, I suppose, where they feel, oh, I've told Hannah about this. So when I do need to, maybe I will tell her about the fact that the last 2 games when I've been striking out, I'm not thinking about the ball, I'm thinking about something else. Or you can tell I'm not into baseball, but I'm trying my best.
No, it's great. No, you did great. But yeah, no, exactly. You just set up that stage. So whenever they are ready, there is zero hesitation, or because if you've written them off and never talked to them, and then they realize they need help, they're going to go to somebody else. They're not going to come to you. So meeting them where they're at is a big part of our jobs. No doubt about it.
In the baseball world, then, have you got any examples when you've worked with somebody that you consider physically talented that's maybe unlocked more of their potential by improving a particular area of their mental side?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because you get to the big leagues and clearly you're mentally or you're physically talented, right? You're the best of the best in the world. But sometimes, and one of the biggest takeaways I've seen is when guys are so good, right? And they go through the minor league levels really quickly. And those are like, in baseball, you have the big league team, but then you have 6 or 7 or 8 teams underneath the big league team that feed that team. And as you progress and get better, you go up a level until you get to the big leagues. And we've had guys who get to the big leagues and they've never failed, right? They have never failed in the minor leagues. They were so good, so physically gifted. And whether they were a high school sign or a college sign, and maybe they didn't even fail in college, like it's a kid who has never experienced failure. And then they get to the best of the best and they experience failure. And they've never really had to have the strategies for resiliency or composure when you are failing, or confidence when you are failing, right? And those 3 things alone, like to build composure, to build resiliency, and to build confidence is a lot to build. And, one talk isn't going to get it. It's got to be practiced every day. And so you absolutely see that where guys get to the big leagues and maybe they haven't really failed, or they have barely struggled, and then they get to the big leagues and they fail. And then the only thing left is to figure it out mentally, right? Physically, they're good. They're where they need to be. They're being challenged, but that doesn't mean they can't handle the challenge. But now it's not a physical challenge, it's a mental challenge. And so that they go to work on, well, you hope they go to work on their mental game and try to figure it out. And it's harder when you're on the big stage because everybody can see what you're doing, and everybody has their opinions of you, and everybody wants to share their opinions of you. And so it's hard when you're trying to figure those things out and you're being scrutinized in all different directions. Like we talked about social media earlier. It's like, how do you find your own confidence and not look for that from everybody else? But how do you also be your own critic and not look at other people's being a critic to you also? So that's one of the biggest examples of when, maybe somebody hasn't had to really work on their mental game just because their physical game carried them so far. But if you talk to anybody, especially athletes, professional athletes who are getting older, but they're still playing professionally. You look at, Tom Brady, any older baseball players, they will tell you that physically they're not as good as they used to be, but now they're even stronger mentally, or they're mentally smarter, they're mentally more prepared, or whatever it is. And that is what's keeping them in the game. So to me, that tells me also, not only like, obviously you got to be physically gifted, right? And equipped and work your tail off. But if you want it to last, you got to be mentally equipped too. Like, no question about it. Your physical ability will last so long, but if you want to add 2, 5, 10 more years, you got to get this working for you too. So I think that's really cool to see those people still being successful and running circles around some of the younger guys, right? Who can't handle failure, just like what we were talking about, because these guys know how to handle failure better. They may not be physically better, but mentally they are. And that's a separator.
Yeah, 2 amazing examples of where the mental side of the game is just so valuable. And if that box isn't ticked, they can be the most talented physical specimen ever, but they're not going to reach peak performance. They're not going to be a Tom Brady. I know you've worked outside of sports as well. So what was your work with Leadership Under Fire?
Yeah. So Leadership Under Fire is an awesome program that is run by a former FDNY firefighter and a former Marine, Jason Bresler. And it's basically teaching mental performance skills and tools to firefighters. And it's been some awesomely, incredibly rewarding work. I mean, they're they're not playing in front of 60,000 fans, right? But they're saving people's lives. And, they're having to do the same thing that the elite level professional athletes are doing. They're having to control their breathing, right? If they can't control their breathing, like, they're going to get low on oxygen. They're going to not have the strength that they need to break down the door to get into a burning house, or to carry a child, right? And they have to be able to handle stress, because on the other side of a locked door is a crying child, right? And it's just unbelievable. So it was super cool just to see how the work that we're doing with athletes that is arguably just a game that they're playing, right, is translating into life-saving career for these men and women who are in the fire departments. And it's cool. We've kind of done a lot with different fire departments. They just call and they want it and they buy in, their leaders learn about it, and then they go teach it to all of their people at their firehouses. And it's just really cool to see, it's, again, mental performance is not just for athletes, right? If you are a human being, whether you are in a relationship, if you have kids, or you have a job, you are performing in all three of those things. And mental performance needs to be talked about and put into your daily repertoire, or at least your weekly repertoire, right? And taking care of you and making sure you're your best mentally and not just physically. And they were bought into it, and they were they train, those guys are a perfect example of how they train so much, right? Because they have to train when it comes to fire. You have to know what you're going to do. You have very little room for mistakes. And so for them to buy into whatever it looks like from the mental side was huge too.
Amazing, Hannah. What were some of the things that maybe differed slightly in terms of conversations that you had versus athletes? Was there anything else you had to delve into?
With them, I mean, it was really similar. I think we just had to kind of realize the severity of what was on the line for them. And it was knowing with athletes, we can say, hey, there's always another game, right? There's always another game. There's always another game. With them, it's there might not always be another fire, or there might not always be the same family. And so it was a lot more of dealing with the seriousness of what's behind it, but it was still the same techniques. So instead of it being okay, we're just going to put in the scenario, it was if this happens, what do we do? And I think one thing that we learned a lot when working with firefighters is they are really good at when something goes wrong in a fire. So say, worst case scenario, firefighters go out, worst case scenario, somebody perishes, right? Somebody dies from a fire. And that case gets looked over millions of times. What mistakes happened? How did it happen? Why did it happen? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? What do we need to change, right? They absolutely dive into that. They dissect it, right? What they didn't do was dissect the things that went well. And so when they would go to a fire and a crazy fire, and they would crush it and say, everyone's fine, everyone's safe, all firefighters safe, they did everything they were supposed to do perfectly fine. They'd just be like, whew, okay, good day. See you later. And so they realized that instead of just creating awareness around the times that went wrong, we also have to create awareness around, well, what went right here? Why were we super successful in an arguably situation when we shouldn't have been successful? And what the heck did we do? And so they started to learn to start dissecting the good too. And that carried over into baseball, right? Because they do the same thing, right? If you go 3 for 4, which means you had 4 at bats and 3 of the 4 you got on base, usually the one thing they remember is the one time that they didn't get on base. And it's hold on, 3 of the 4 times you got on base. Can we look back to what you did 75% of the time? Not just the 25% of the time on what your mistake was. And I think that's hard for us as humans in general, because we want to be perfect. And so anytime there's a flaw, again, going back to the mirror, right? When we look in the mirror, we're immediately looking for what's wrong. We're not looking for what's right and what's going well. And so we really have to work hard and to train our brains to notice the good and to find the good. And to me, it's not don't look at the bad. We're going to look at the bad. We're humans. That's what we do. So it's okay, if you're going to look at the bad, you're going to tell me one bad thing, you got to tell me one good thing. And it's forcing your brain to create this, okay, if I'm going to look for the bad, I'm also going to force myself to look at the good and finding that balance. Cause I don't know, we have it's a natural negative bias, right? Where we as humans are just trained to notice anything bad first, anything negative, anything scary first. And that just comes with who we are and our ancestors and how our brains are made to help us survive, right? Our brains are to help us keep alive, right? And so they're trained to notice the bad first, right? They're trained to notice if a bear is running at us, right? Instead of that you're I don't know, that you had a really good day, right? We don't notice that, but we sure as heck notice the bear, right? And so I think we have to really try hard to notice the good. And our brain will work itself out on finding all the bad too.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And I love that bear example because evolutionary, we are designed to pick out the bad in order to survive and make sure that there's another Colin or another Hannah down the line to keep,
Yeah.
keep things going. So though
Yeah.
that makes complete sense. But I really like that when you think of maybe the three pitches or bats that went well, establish, was my routine for that good? Was my self-talk good? Was my concentration good? And then perhaps I can try and replicate that more often so that maybe I'm going 4 for 4 rather than 3 for 4 more often. And in the same way, if this particular challenging situation, this particular fire, we handled it really well because we did X, Y, and Z. Whereas if I compare that to the incident that didn't go so well, actually we didn't have the same approach to unfurling the hose or whatever else you can get it down to minutia. You can really analyze from a physical but also a mental perspective, like how do I replicate the times when things went really well? And of course, as humans, we just fight against that because we're like, no, but what about the time it was bad when I just swung and missed because I wasn't concentrating.
Totally. I mean, we all do it. And I think the sooner we realize that we do it, the sooner we can start to fight that battle back. Right. And that's why I say, hey, don't think about, I never say, don't think about the negative because I'm not sure we can stop that thought. I know we can challenge that thought and we can search out the good things around us, but we have to be proactive and actually do that and work on that. That doesn't just happen. We have to work on doing that. But then once you're proactive about it and you do put it to the test, like say every week you start your day saying one good thing about yourself, then maybe you do start to notice it more because you know at the end of the day, you're going to have to say one good thing about yourself. So you better start paying more attention or you're going to be spending 10 minutes a night trying to find one good thing, right? Which it's funny and we laugh but like I've asked players, tell me something good about you and they can't come up with anything and they're in the big leagues. And it's like, hold on, like there's a million good things about you, but they can't see it. And so I do believe that if you find that balance and that management, it will start to come more naturally because you start to look for it throughout the day. But we have to actually practice that and put in time for that. That doesn't just happen.
I'm a huge fan of gratitude journaling, and I've spoken about it with a lot of the listeners and a lot of guests before. And one of the big things that benefited me was at the end of the day writing 3 great things that I experienced, which is greater than the one thing that I write, which is how I'll improve. And when I used to have maybe more negative self-talk, I wouldn't have framed it as how I'll improve. I would have framed it as what did I do poorly today or what did I do badly today? But the prompt in the journal that I use, the 6-minute diary, is how will I improve? And I absolutely love writing it down and then writing like an action how I improve it rather than just, I was on my phone too much today. I can maybe write, I can improve by limiting my screen time. Perhaps I'm going to leave my phone out of the room between set hours this time, or I'm not going to check it first thing in the morning. I'll turn my data off for my walk or my steps because I used it for 20 minutes during that time when normally I don't. All these things that you can reframe are much more helpful than if you just batter yourself down. And in the same way that you've got that little sticky note on your mirror, if you write something down, it can be quite powerful. I think even more so than when we type it into our phones. I think pen and paper can help.
No, I think that's awesome. I think anything you can actually go into the how and the why is way more impactful than just the what, right? So for you, the what was I'm on my phone too much. How do I stop being on my phone? And which is what you said. And then why is that important, right? Like, why do I want to get off my phone more? Maybe the more I'm on my phone, the shittier I sleep, right? Or the more I'm on my phone, the less I'm in the present moment. Or the more I'm on my phone, the more I'm comparing myself to others. And it doesn't actually make me feel good about myself. So by giving yourself the what, you're creating awareness, right? The what is, I want to be off my phone more. Okay. How do I actually do that? You're giving yourself a tangible way to do it. And then why is creating the internal motivation of why you're doing that, right? So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to put my phone down so I don't, waste time on it. That's great. But like, why, or why are you really doing that? And then once it becomes personal, then it's easier to say no to it. It's easier to put that to the side. You're not just like, oh yeah, I'm doing this just because I want to be better. Like it's like you actually create the buy-in that you're trying to achieve. And there's something amazing about that. Once you actually have that internal motivation of why you're doing it, instead of just doing it because you think you should be doing it, It's like putting a purpose to it. And we say that a lot, right? On purpose, with purpose. Make sure what you're doing it on purpose and with a purpose. You're not just going through the motions, doing something because somebody told you to do it, right? It's like, no, why are you actually doing this? Do you know why you're doing it? Do you know why you do everything that you do? And then once you start to create that awareness, it's like, oh yeah, I shouldn't be doing half of the things that I'm doing during a day, you know? And we're not saying be perfect. Like maybe it's like, great, if I can spend less than 2 hours on my phone today, then I'm going to reward myself with something else. Right. Like, and that's where it gets really cool. And I don't know, you kind of got to play with that a little bit for yourself and figure out what works best for you. And some of them will work and go great. And other ones, you're going to hate it. And that's okay. Like, don't force yourself, find what works for you, but always be aware and doing things on purpose with purpose. And
Brilliant.
I always come back to the question, is what I'm doing helping me or hurting me?
That's a great question to ask yourself. A difficult question as well, but I love that WHW, what, how, and why, because straight away that third question, like you say, it brings a personal element into it, because particularly in an era where you listen to a podcast like this, maybe people are a bit inspired and riled up after it, Hannah, they want to get after it. But if they don't ask themselves why, then introducing some of the mental performance tactics and tricks and tips that you're advocating for, they don't have the reason to stick to it. So I love that you've outlined the reason that they would maybe delve into why. Particularly, I've just recommended gratitude journaling. That's absolutely not for everyone. But if you have a why that you think makes it worth the how, then you're much more likely to stick to it, and you're much more likely to be, oh, well, that was a great tip. Whereas you might start it and be like, I'm doing this because I heard it on that podcast that I listen to every Sunday, and it sounded like a good idea, but I'm not really sure what I'm getting from this. That's
totally 100%. And then there's no reason you shouldn't even be doing it. It's a waste of time, right? It's just like, we talk about taking a deep breath, and taking a deep breath can be really, really important in all aspects of life. But if you don't know how to take a proper deep breath, or you don't know why you're taking a deep breath, you're going through the motions, right? You're just like, oh, great. Like that did nothing for me right now. That did literally nothing. I might as well have not done it, but I can check a box and say I did take a deep breath today, right? It's like, it's pointless. And so a lot of mental performance is just creating awareness and purpose into the things that you are doing every day. And then once you start to become aware, you're going to be like, oh, there's like 3 or 4 or 7 hours in the day where I'm doing mindless stuff that I'm wasting my time with, like that I'm out and I'm wasting my life away with, and whatever it is. And then you get to start doing the things that you really want to do. And you get to start becoming the person you want to become, both outside of work and inside of work, and just like who you are as a human being, you know, like it's so much more than just performance, right? It's who you are as a human. And do you like who you are as a human? And if you don't, then you got to start figuring out why, right? What do you not like about yourself? And why, and how can we change those things in a healthy way? So, yeah.
Yeah, spot on, Hannah. Now, the reason that I came across you was on LinkedIn, of all places. I saw Mental Sweat Monday. When did that start, and what kind of compelled you to start creating it?
So it's crazy. I can't believe that started 3 years ago. I actually started, people kept asking me, what is mental performance, right? What is mental performance? And I was like, okay, how can I start sharing with the world what mental performance is, right? And educating the world on mental performance. And so I was like, what do I like on social media? And I was like, I like short little videos. You know, I'm more of a visual learner than I am like just sitting there reading long text or having a 20-minute video, right? A 1-minute video was a sweet spot. So I just created this 1-minute video, and my husband helped me come up with the name. You know, I call it Mental Sweat because I want people to like resonate with it, a physical sweat, right? Like, just like you're supposed, like the world or the health organizations tell us, like we should be getting a physical sweat in every day, whether it's walking, yoga, like whatever it is, get a physical sweat in. It's so healthy for you. Well, so is a mental sweat, right? And whatever that is for you. And so it was trying to tie it into, and 3 years ago is when it was like, it still is a crazy fad on social media, like all the different workouts we should be doing and doing this and eating this and being healthy. But it was really predominant then. And so it was an idea to like, make sure people remember to get a mental sweat in every day, but then also here's 1 minute to get you thinking, right? So you listen to it and then you go, how can I apply this to my life? And does this correlate to what I'm doing? Does this work for me? Am I already really good at this? And how can I keep getting better at it? And for people to try to make it personal to them. That's kind of where it came to be, and it's grown, and it's been a really fun journey. And yeah, it's most people find me through Mental Sweat. So I'm trying to figure out what the next step is for it, honestly. So we'll see where we go from here.
Yeah, it's certainly a great piece of content, and I'd love to dive into a couple of areas that you have spoken about on it that really resonated with me. And I've saved them, I've sent them on to friends, and I think that's always a sign of something that you have resonated with when you send it on to others and you say, oh, you should check this out because it's a topic that I really enjoyed and you might get something from it. And particularly when it's 1 minute, somebody tends to be like, okay, I'll watch that and I'll get involved. But one of the areas I saw you speak about was planning and preparing for failure. What does that involve and why is it important?
Yeah. So, this is always a fun one for me because we don't ever want to fail. But again, we know if we're high performers and we're trying to achieve our best, then we're going to do hard things, which means we're going to fail. So we're not planning to fail, but if we fail, we have a plan. That's what I say. So we're not planning on failing, but if we fail, just like you said, if it starts raining, we want our roof to be fixed, right? And we want to have those tools. So it's really about being proactive and having what I call a contingency plan. So in the military, this is a perfect example. They have like combat vehicles and they're going down, a dirt road, and they're not planning on a bomb to be in the road, right? But if their vehicle hits a bomb, everybody on that vehicle knows exactly what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. And so they're not planning to run over a bomb, right? But if they do, they know exactly what they need to do. So there's no chaos, right? They know exactly what they're supposed to be, where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be doing. And I think the same goes for us as performers. If we know, especially when we're playing sports, or even if in your business, if you know, like the areas where you're probably going to fail, or you're probably going to make a mistake, right? Or your boss is like, every time you send your boss something, they always send something back that you have to fix, right? It's like, we're not planning for that to happen, but what's our plan for when it does happen? And it's like, am I going to take a deep breath? Am I going to say a mantra? Am I going to go walk outside for 5 minutes? Like, how am I going to handle that failure? And just what that does is, one, that makes you not fear the failure as much, right? Because you're like, I have everything I need if that were to ever happen. So I'm no longer like, oh God, but what if this happens? Well, what if that does happen? We have a plan. We have a tool to pull out of our back pocket to implement. So your fear decreases in whatever that failure is, because fear of failure is real, right? Fear of making a mistake. We don't want to do that. But if you have ways to combat it, your fear is already drastically downsized. And then it gives you a coping mechanism when it happens, instead of it happening and you like downward spiraling and it gets worse and worse and worse. And all of a sudden now, 1 minute turns into one bad minute, turns into a bad day, turns into a bad week, turns into a bad month. And then we're like, what the hell happened? Right? It's like, if we had a plan for that 1 minute mistake, the next minute would have been fine, but we didn't have the plan. So it's also a way to stop downward spiraling and get you right back on track. Because I often say the most mentally tough performer isn't the one who doesn't fail often, right? It's the one who can fail fast. Like, you're going to fail and you're going to get right back up and do it again. Like, and the more we can minimize that time of frustration or whatever's happening between the failure and the next attempt, we want to just minimize that as much as possible. So I think that's my idea of a contingency planning is, again, we don't want to fail, but if you are performing at the top level of whatever it is you're doing, chances of you failing are very high, and that's okay. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing. And so let's just prepare for it. So when we do get derailed, we're off the tracks for a minute, not 2 hours,
Yeah, incredible, Hannah. And the coping mechanisms that you named there were all trigger positive habits that were set off by a failure or an incident that didn't go to plan. Yeah. Like it was deep breath, a mantra, a go for a walk. These are positive actions to get back on the horse as soon as possible. So I love that you've given those actionable examples, because it's all well and good saying, I have a plan for what happens when you go to failure. And then somebody thinks, well, what do high performers do? But you've given a few examples there. And these aren't magic quick fixes, but they're also not unattainable for anybody. You all have the wherewithal and the power and the resources, if you're listening to a podcast in your AirPods, to do all these different things when you come up against a challenging situation. So that's absolutely great. If you've maybe got a track record of having some major failures that you haven't been able to overcome as quickly, how do we deal with things like doubt that's lingering in the back of the head. So for example, I've failed at this before. Yes, I've had my deep breath and I've gone for my walk. I've written down some positive self-talk, but I just doubt whether I'm actually capable of doing this.
Yeah, doubt is very real, right? It's very real. And I would just say one of the things when we're in those tough situations, when we failed and failed and failed, and when we're really starting to doubt ourselves, one, I don't think we want to pretend like that's not happening, right? I think a lot of people sometimes are like, hey, it could be worse, or don't worry about that, right? They try to like sprinkle it in fairy dust and unicorns and rainbows. And like, that's the opposite of what I would say we have to do, right? Is like, okay, let's really open up and get honest about this and what's going on, right? So there's no doubt that you're struggling, right? And so step one is creating awareness around what's actually going on. And step two is accepting it. And I think that's hard, right? Because especially if you're a high level performer, you don't want to accept any kind of failure, right? You don't want to accept any struggle, but in order to move on, you have to accept that that's where you are right now. And so building awareness, accepting it, and then what the heck do we need to do to fix it, to adjust it? Is it a physical fix? Is it a mental fix? Is it a combination of both, right? And I think sometimes people are so quick to just physically adjust something, especially in baseball, right? Just change a mechanic, just edit, just switch this, just do this, just move your feet like this. When in reality, that can mess them up even more, because maybe nothing's physically wrong. Maybe it is something that's mentally wrong. Maybe it is just a severe lack of confidence, or a severe lack of composure. And like every time you step into the box, you just freak out, right? And so we have to dissect that. We have to figure out what's actually going on. And then we have to really dive into working on that and seeing how we can help it. And I think another thing you could do is, when that doubt creeps in, I like to think of it as, there's a great story of the tale of two wolves. If you haven't heard of it, I would say like, go look it up, right? It's very similar to a story of like having an angel and a devil on your shoulder, right? But it's two wolves on your shoulders. And basically one wolf is like doubt and negativity and loud, bad voices. And the other one is hope and faith and excitement and optimism and all that good stuff. And, this grandfather is telling his young grandson a story, and the grandson's like, well, which wolf is louder? And he was like, the one you feed the most. And so it's not, the reason I love that is because it's not just like this angel and devil talking to you, you're talking to them in turn, which is making them louder. So again, going back to like, when you're doubting, when you're failing, are you looking for every single thing that you're failing at and just digging deeper and deeper and deeper and like just yelling at yourself constantly? Or are you like able to find, okay, today I still did this poorly, but I also did this well. And now you're feeding this wolf, because whatever wolf you're feeding is going to be loud. And so when you're in that situation where it feels like nothing can go right, that's even the most important times to find what is going right. And then of course, going back to one of the first things we said was like, what can you control about what's going on here, right? You may not be able to control the stats. You can't control the fans. You can't control majority of what's happening here, but is there one thing you can control? Can you delete social media so you don't hear any more outside noise? Can you work on it for 5 more minutes a day? Can you work on your mental side instead of working on your physical side for 5 minutes? Whatever it is, what can you actually control about it? But it's making sure you're creating awareness, creating acceptance, and then figuring out what actually needs to be adjusted.
Yes, another brilliant framework and actionable steps we can take to overcome another key topic, Hannah. So absolutely love that, and a great way for us to wrap up the podcast. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And if people would like to continue the conversation with you, Hannah, where should they head towards?
Yeah, you can find me anywhere. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, just Hannah Huesman. Yeah, nothing crazy or fancy, but you can find me there and find Mental Sweat Monday there, and feel free to shout and ask questions and anything else you got, or give me ideas for Mental Sweat Monday videos.
Amazing. The people will definitely get involved, Hannah. They'll be inspired off the back of this, and they'll have lots more that they want to ask you about, that they'll be screaming down their AirPods to get me to ask, but I haven't been able to in the time that we've been allowed. But it's been absolutely brilliant. I'm sure you've all enjoyed it as well. Please take a screenshot, pop it on your Instagram story, tag me at call.cambro, tag Hannah, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.